I'm going to get started here, and then I'm going to hand it over to Paula. And so we are part of this larger group that comprises Claudia, she's probably here in attendance, Daisy, Anna, and Simone. We are from different universities in Brazil. I'm from the Catholic University in Sao Paulo, and Paula is from the Sao Paulo State University. And we have other colleagues from other states. So this is a brief plan. I'm going to get started talking about issues related to information, discourse, corpus linguistics, collocations, these different buckets that comprise our approach to the discourse of science. And then I'm going to talk more specifically about our approach, our method to the analysis of this particular corpus. And then Paula is going to take over to talk about the specific dimensions that we detected, and then she's going to do the closing remarks. So first, I want to thank Jan and Gabi for the kind invitation to Paula and myself. Also, I want to thank the SHE unit for their wonderful work on the discourse of science and the relationship between the medical sciences and the humanities. Also, I want to thank our funders, these four different funding organizations. So our goals are to determine the discourses around COVID-19 in research articles and compare two different responses toward the disease, one that we're referring to as controversial response, which comprises the use of non-endorsed medications such as hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin for treating patients. And the other side of the coin is the endorsed response, which makes use of medical, social, and technological responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. We also are proposing this different corpus method that we're calling collocation shifts for identifying the shifts in meaning that occur between the texts that espouse each one of these two different approaches. And we are basing that on collocation. So very much work in progress. So we're bound to move things around a little bit as we go along. So the basic framework is that we're working under this big umbrella of the infodemic. And in our approach, we're not looking at truth or falsehood as most people are. We are looking at the discourses and the ecosystems that comprise these discourses and enable these discourses to live and survive and reproduce. So we are tying the notion of infodemic to what we're calling anti-democratic causes or ideologies, such as these ones listed here. And the one that we're talking about today specifically comes under this umbrella of science denial. So we're trying to unveil the discourses that enable these things to take place in the world. And we're looking at these discursive formations, the meaning effects that occur in these texts using corpus-based methods. Our corpus design is this one for our core 19 corpus. So we have the two different subcorpora, the controversial and the endorsed. The controversial subcorpus has a very narrow focus on treatment. This is because we selected articles that came from these sources, such as the Curas Medical Journal and these other ones that provide these notions that you can treat COVID using non-approved methods. And then we have the endorsed one, which it takes a much broader view of the disease. And so we took those texts from the Lit COVID database. The corpus size is here, so we have over 1,100 texts, over 5 million words. The size of each corpus is different. So there's 116 texts in the controversial response and 991 in the endorsed corpus. That doesn't matter. I'm going to explain why. The corpus is not balanced, but that has no effect on the findings, as I'm going to explain later. So COVID-19 response literature, I'm gonna only say this. They have different ideologies and they have different purposes, but they both use academic language and research papers as a register. And so it's very difficult to tease out who is defending a controversial response and who is defending an endorsed response, because both are using academic discourse and through the same channels. But we think that using our approach, we can identify these different discourses and then be able to detect these different ideologies. So we have two different approaches, a traditional and multidimensional one to collocation analysis. The traditional one is when you look at word association measures through individual collocations. In our approach, we use this multidimensional method where we use statistical correlation and we detect collocation networks, which is different from treating each collocation independently. This is our general framework for our collocation-based MD analysis. We collect keywords, then we compute the collocations, then we do a factor analysis. And through the factor analysis, we're able to detect the sets of collocations in the corpus. And then we interpret those by looking at the texts. And we, based on the text analysis and the statistical analysis, we're able to label the dimensions. So we have this, we extract keywords, and we do this by using the target corpus as, for instance, a controversial response as a target corpus, using the endorsed corpus as a comparison corpus. And then we switch that around and we use a controversial corpus as a comparison corpus to the endorsed one. We come up with different numbers of keywords. That doesn't matter, as I'm going to explain, because in the end, we take only the most significant, the 500 most significant collocations from each corpus. So it's balanced for the number of collocations you're using. The most important point here is that you're using the same, we take the same keywords for the endorsed corpus, and then we look at that keyword in the target corpus, and we take the target corpus keywords and we look at that keyword in the controversial corpus. So we differentiate between those two using the collocations. So we think that through the different collocations, we're able to detect the different meanings of these words. For instance, if we take the keyword hydroxychloroquine, which is a controversial response keyword, we're going to see that the sets of collocations that occur with this particular word is different. On the left, you have the controversial response ones. So hydroxychloroquine is frequently used with words such as combination, degree, protective, administration alone, etc. And these collocates never occur in the endorsed corpus. They're all zeros. Whereas if we look at hydroxychloroquine in the endorsed corpus, we see it's used with known azithromycin medications and so on at a much higher degree than in controversial ones. So the representation of hydroxychloroquine changes drastically when it's used in a text that supports it from in contrast to a text that doesn't support it. For instance, the word patients too. So the notion of a patient changes dramatically from the endorsed corpus to the controversial corpus. In the endorsed corpus, a patient is normally constructed as a subject of scientific research, whereas in the controversial corpus, it's generally represented as high-risk cases that need instant attention, and therefore they have to make use of whatever it is available to help those patients. So the notion of a patient, the notion of all of these keywords changes. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Paula.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, so as we move forward, I'll take you through some of the key findings from our collocation shift analysis, and I'll show how controversial and endorsed responses differ discursively. So this first dimension contrasts the discourse of disputed response papers, which are narrow in that they present these very disputed treatments, and the discourses of endorsed response papers, which present a much broader range of responses. Okay. On this slide, we have the factor pattern for dimension 1. The word clouds comprise the collocations that are part of each pole. We have used this notation for the collocations, which has either a P or an R, the P standing for controversial and the R for endorsed. This is followed by two words, which form the collocation. So, for instance, discharged patients, it's a collocation, or respiratory rate, it's another collocation, both found in the controversial response papers. On the right, we have the same notation for the endorsed response papers. The font size signals the weight of each collocation on the factor. So the larger the font, the larger the weight, and vice versa. So after we interpreted the factor pattern and the texts that scored on each pole, we proposed these labels. On the left, we proposed the label controversial response endorsed with hydroxychloroquine and similar dubious medications as effective treatments to reduce mortality and other alleged benefits, lending credibility to pharmaceutical messianism. On the right, we propose the label endorsed response, examined psychological issues arising from the impact of the pandemic on mental health, social distancing, and other implemented measures. We will illustrate this poll with the texts next. So here is an example from the controversial response. It highlights the hydroxychloroquine as a treatment that allegedly reduces in hospital mortality in sub-Saharan Africa. Despite the evidence being inconclusive, the text strongly advocates for the use of this drug, reinforcing the effectiveness of disputed responses. In the next slide, in contrast, The endorsed response looks beyond the immediate medical context. This example discusses the psychological tool of the pandemic, particularly among health workers, women, and young people. It's not just about physical health, but also about the social and emotional dimensions of the pandemic, which are often overlooked in the controversial texts. Now, we are going to skip dimension 2 for reasons of time, and we are going to present dimension 3, which contrasts the way controversial responses employ statistical rigor to legitimize their arguments versus how the endorsed response focuses on disseminating science through open data and transparent practices. Right, so here we have some collocations, as you can see, in both positive and negative side poles. So we use the same conventions as I mentioned earlier for dimension 1. On the positive pole, we see controversial responses using seemingly rigorous statistical methods to bolster the credibility of treatments like hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. On the negative pole, in the same slide, yeah. On the negative pole, endorsed responses focus on sharing data openly and encouraging scientific discussions. It's a clash between selective use of data and the principles of transparency. We have the collocations on the positive pole, for example, regression linear, respiratory activity, variables standard, and in the negative pole, acute kidney, hospitalized associated mortality increase. So those are some combinations that are very frequent in these two poles. Right. Now, in this example, a multivariate regression analysis is used to show that hydroxychloroquine supposedly reduces hospital stays and the need for ICU admission. However, the study's conclusion ultimately reveals no significant difference in patient outcomes, which underlines how statistics can be used to support the discourse of statistical rigor. We will see similar examples in the positive pole in the next 3 slides, 29, 30, and 31. But we are going to head to slide 32, where we have the negative pole in this same dimension. So meanwhile, the endorsed response encourages open data sharing practices. This example emphasizes the availability of data sets for external review, promoting transparency and reproducibility. In the scientific community, this approach builds trust and ensures that findings can be scrutinized and validated by other researchers. Right. Now, dimension 4, in dimension 4, we see a strong contrast in how the two responses deal with repurposed drugs. Controversial responses often promote these drugs like hydroxychloroquine as solutions to COVID-19 without critically evaluating their effectiveness or safety. On the other hand, endorsed responses carefully assess treatments, considering their efficacy and risks, while promoting open science and ethical practices. Right.
Excuse me, can we move to the conclusion, do you think? Because we're running out of time.
Okay, we have 2 minutes, I think, but we can
2 minutes?
So.
Oh, sorry. So, okay.
I think so, I'm not sure. Right, so, but we can do so, Tony, if you want to. Let's see.
No, it's just that I thought we were close to the time being up.
Yes, close.
Close, okay. So then in the next slide now, we have an example, yes. On the positive pole, controversial responses highlight repurposed drugs, emphasizing perceived benefits like reduced mortality, while downplaying risks. On the negative pole, endorsed responses critically evaluate the outcomes of these drugs, paying attention to adverse events and insisting on ethical research practices. So some of the collocations on the positive pole are hydroxychloroquine alone, rheumatoid systemic, and in the negative pole, materials availability, information supplementary. Okay. All right, so I think we can move to slide to the conclusion. So yeah. So in conclusion, our analysis shows clear distinctions between the controversial and endorsed responses to COVID-19. It's important to note that the controversial and endorsed responses avoid each other's collocations and terminology, reinforcing the idea that these are two separate meaning-making systems. They reflect differing ideologies, histories, and motivations, all of which shape how information and disinformation are communicated during a global crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you so much. And we hope we have shed light on how linguistic analysis can help understand the deeper discourses that drive both scientific communication and disinformation. Thank you.